They say love is blind, but I think it's more accurate to say love is trusting. It's handing someone a map of all your secret places, all your vulnerabilities, and believing they'll never use it to navigate a path to hurt you. For 3 years, I handed Eric that map. And for 3 years, he was charting his own course, right over a cliff. And he was determined to take me and my daughter Lily with him. This isn't a story about getting even. It's a story about building a wall. A strong, immovable, legal wall between the life we deserved and the lie he was living. My name is Cate Gomez, and this is how I discovered the man I was going to marry was a phantom, and how I used his own blueprint of deceit to construct a prison of his own making. I've always been a fixer, a doer. I run a small but successful architectural salvage business. My hands are usually covered in a little dust. My van always has a pair of work boots in the back. It's an honest living. Born from my dad's workshop, built with my own 2 hands. It afforded us a good life. A cozy little house, stability for Lily, who was 10 at the time. It was enough. More than enough. It was a life built on real things, solid things. You can't fake the weight of a 100-year-old oak beam in your hands. Then I met Eric Williams. He was dazzling. A venture capitalist, or so he said. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage and talked about market fluctuations and high net worth individuals with a casual ease that felt like a different language. He swept me off my feet, told me my practicality was refreshing, that my strength was alluring. He made me feel like my simple, grounded world was something exotic he wanted to be a part of. He was a splash of brilliant, intoxicating color in my world of earthy, reliable tones. But the shine started to dull, almost imperceptibly at first. He'd make little comments. That van is charming, but are you sure it projects the right image for a soon-to-be Mrs. Williams? Or, Lily's public school is fine, I suppose, but my friends' children are all at Crestwood Academy. He started referring to my business as my little hobby. He'd laugh and say, "How's the junk business, honey?" and wait for me to laugh along. I brushed it off. I thought it was just his way, his high-pressure world. My humility, my contentment with my life, which had always been my strength, became a recurring punchline for him. But I loved him. And Lily, my sweet, shy Lily, adored him. He was the fun, exciting father figure who promised trips to Disneyland and bought her extravagant gifts she didn't need. He'd fill her head with fantasies of a life in a mansion with a pony, making our little home with its well-loved garden seem ordinary. So I made excuses. I told myself he was just ambitious, that he wanted the best for us. The real turning point, the unforgivable act, happened 6 months before the wedding. We were at a dinner party he'd insisted on throwing at a ridiculously expensive restaurant. His business associates were there, their polished wives, all of them looking like they'd just stepped out of a magazine. I was in a simple black dress I'd owned for years, feeling like a crow among peacocks. The conversation turned to investments. Eric was holding court, talking about a sure-thing startup. One of his partners, a man named Robert, turned to me and said, "And what about you, Cate? I hear you're quite the entrepreneur yourself." Before I could even open my mouth, Eric let out a short, dismissive laugh. He put his arm around me, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like ownership. "Oh, Cate, my darling runs a charming little junkyard. She collects old doorknobs and window frames. It keeps her busy, gets her out of the house. It's quaint." The table got quiet. My face burned.
But the worst was yet to come. He squeezed my shoulder and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "But don't you worry. Once we're married, she won't have to play with her rusted treasures anymore. I'll be taking care of everything, her and that quiet little mouse of a daughter. They'll finally have a proper life." That quiet little mouse? He said it with a smile, as if it were a term of endearment. I felt the air leave my lungs. He wasn't just insulting me anymore. He was targeting my child, my Lily, who was the entire reason I breathed. He was reducing her beautiful, thoughtful spirit to a character flaw. In that moment, something in me broke. Not with a shatter, but with a cold, quiet click. The map was gone. The trust was dead. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about consequences. I didn't say a word on the car ride home. I just looked out the window, watching the streetlights blur past. Eric mistook my silence for shame. He patted my knee and said, "Don't be sore, darling. You know it's for the best. You both need a firmer hand." That was the last time he ever patronized me.
The next day, after I dropped Lily off at school, I didn't go to the warehouse. I went to my lawyer. Not a small-time family lawyer, but the one who handled my parents' estate. See, that little junkyard Eric loved to mock, it was built on a piece of land my father left me. Land that, thanks to a new commercial development, had become incredibly valuable. I'd been quietly successful for years, and I'd invested every spare penny. I had resources Eric couldn't even imagine, because he was too busy looking at the dust on my boots to see the foundation I was standing on. My father didn't just leave me a business. He left me a legacy of quiet, unassailable security. My lawyer, a wonderfully sharp woman named Angela, listened to my story, her face becoming granite. "So you want to call off the wedding? We can draft—" "No," I said, and my voice was scarily calm. "It's not about calling it off. It's about making sure he can never do this to anyone again. He's a predator. He's going to financially cripple some other woman, emotionally abuse some other child. I need to know everything about him. Everything." Angela nodded. "Due diligence. Consider it done." A week later, she called me back. Her voice was tight. "Cate, there are discrepancies, significant ones. The sure thing startup he was always pitching to his investors, it didn't exist. The office he claimed to work out of, a virtual address. The Williams Capital website was a template, less than 6 months old. The man was a ghost, a con artist building his castle on the sand of other people's credit. Angela had a contact who dug deeper into financials that weren't public. There were credit card applications under different variations of his name, maxed out lines of credit, and a trail of small claims court judgments from past landlords and ex-girlfriends. The pattern was clear, and it was ugly. But the most chilling part, the detail that made my blood run cold, was his chronic illness. For the last year, Eric had been having these episodes. He'd disappear for a day or two, claiming he was checking into St. Jude's Hospital, the West Wing, for tests for a mysterious, debilitating condition. He'd come back looking pale, talking about bad hospital food and beeping machines. He even had a fake patient wristband he must have printed himself. He used it to elicit sympathy, to explain why he was always short on cash. Medical bills, you see? It was the ultimate tool of manipulation, preying on the very human instinct to care for a sick loved one. I remember one time he'd just returned from one of these stays. He was lying on my couch, a cold compress on his forehead, going on and on about the incompetent nurses. Lily, with her kind heart, had drawn him a get-well-soon picture. He'd glanced at it, given her a weak smile, and then tossed it aside on the coffee table when he thought she wasn't looking. The memory of that small, crumpled drawing fueled me now. I did a simple Google search. St. Jude's Hospital, West Wing demolition. The top result was a news article from 3 years ago, with a picture. The West Wing of St. Jude's had been torn down to make way for a parking garage. He wasn't just a liar, he was a lazy, arrogant liar. He'd built his web of deceit with the flimsiest of threads, assuming no one would ever bother to check. And I was an architect, trained to look at foundations, to read blueprints, to spot a fatal flaw in a structure before it was too late. It was time to start building with steel. My plan wasn't about revenge, it was about enforcement. I was going to use his own lies, his own greed, to dismantle him. I continued the wedding planning with a newfound, detached precision. I played the doting, concerned fiancé. When he'd mention his illness, I'd pour him a glass of water and look suitably worried. "Oh, Eric, you poor thing, tell me about the treatment." And I'd record it. I was gathering evidence, not of our private moments, but of him detailing his fake business deals to me, of him complaining about his fake hospital visits. I was building my case, brick by patient brick. I even went to the city archives and got the official building permits and demolition certificates for St. Jude's West Wing. I wanted my evidence to be unassailable, documented by the city itself. The trap was set. He just didn't know he was already standing in the middle of it. The springboard for the end was, of course, his greed. He came to me looking somber. He took my hands. "Cate, my love, the doctors, they have a new treatment in Switzerland. It's expensive, but it could give me a real chance. A chance to be a proper husband to you, a real father to Lily." He needed $50,000 just to secure the spot. I looked at him, this man who had called my daughter a mouse, who had tossed aside her drawing, and I smiled my sweetest, most convincing smile. "Of course, Eric. Anything for you. Why don't you come by my office tomorrow? I'll have a cashier's check waiting for you." He looked like he'd won the lottery. I could almost see the calculations going on behind his eyes, the new watch he could buy, the debts he could clear. There was no thought of Switzerland, no thought of illness. It was all a transaction. The next day, I didn't meet him at my dusty warehouse. I met him in the conference room of a sleek, high-rise law firm that overlooked the entire city. Angela was with me. So was Robert, his business partner, and 2 other men Eric had been pitching. I'd invited them. I told them I had crucial information about a new, can't-miss investment opportunity Eric was involved in. They were curious and a little wary. Eric walked in, beaming, expecting an envelope. He stopped dead when he saw the room. His eyes darted from Robert to the other men, to Angela, and finally to me. I was sitting at the head of the polished mahogany table, perfectly calm, dressed in a simple but sharp business suit I'd bought for the occasion. I clicked again. The next slide was the demolition article, the headline bold and clear. As you can see, the West Wing was demolished 3 years ago. I find it fascinating that you've been receiving treatment in a parking garage. The ambiance must be unique. Robert let out a low, incredulous chuckle. Eric's face went from confused to ashen. That's a mistake. A different St. Jude's. You don't understand the medical system." "I'm sure that's it." Click. The next slide was a screenshot of the Williams Capital website, with a timestamp showing it was created just 7 months ago. Now, let's talk about your business, or as the State Business Registry calls it, your DBA, doing business as. A sole proprietorship with no assets, no capital, and no registered investments. I turned to look at Robert and the others. Gentlemen, the Sure Thing startup, Aura Sync? Its corporate headquarters, according to its filings, is a P.O. box in a UPS store. The same one Eric uses. The same one listed on his driver's license from 6 months ago. The room was silent. You could hear the hum of the projector. Eric was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His ghost. "This is slander. You have no right. She's a jealous little—" My voice remained calm, almost conversational. "I have every right. You see, you spent so much time looking down on my little junkyard. You never stopped to wonder who actually owned the land it sits on. You never asked about Gomez Holdings or the investment portfolio I've managed since I was 25. You were so busy pretending to be a king, you didn't realize you were proposing to the woman who owned the castle." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cool, polished table. "The game is over, Eric. You built a house of cards. I'm just providing the wind." It was then that I glanced toward the door. Angela had arranged it. Standing there, just outside the glass wall of the conference room, was Lily. Her babysitter had brought her. She was watching. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a dawning, fierce pride. She saw her mother, not as a mouse, but as a lioness, calm and powerful in her den. And in that moment, every cruel word he'd said about her was erased, burned away by the sheer, undeniable force of the truth. The fallout was swift and absolute. Robert and the other men filed a fraud lawsuit against Eric that same week. Turns out, I wasn't the only one he'd tried to scam. They had collectively given him over $20,000 as seed money for his phantom ventures. Without my money to prop him up, his entire facade collapsed within days. He lost everything. His rented penthouse, his leased car, his access to the circles he so desperately wanted to be a part of. The social ostracization was complete. He was a pariah, a laughingstock. I heard through the grapevine that he was eventually served with a restraining order from one of his previous investors and had to move back in with a reluctant relative in another state. He called me, of course. He raged, he cried. He begged. He said it was all a misunderstanding, that he was sick and needed help. He even, in a final, pathetic attempt, claimed he was checking into a different hospital for his stress. I listened to his desperate, rambling voicemails only once. Then I deleted them. I never responded. There was no apology that could bridge the chasm of his deceit. My goal was never reconciliation. It was eradication. I had permanently removed his power to harm us. The door was not just closed, it was bricked over. The mortar mixed with the ashes of his own lies. That was 2 years ago. My world now, it's brighter, quieter, and infinitely more peaceful. I used the resources I'd always had to expand my business, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I opened a small gallery space next to the warehouse to showcase the most beautiful pieces we find, turning my rusted treasures into celebrated works of history and art. Lily, my sweet Lily, she's blossomed. She's not a quiet mouse anymore. She's a vibrant, confident young woman who isn't afraid to use her voice. Just last week, she stood up to a bully at school who was picking on a quieter kid. She told me afterwards, her chin held high, "I just thought about what you did to Eric, Mom, and I wasn't scared anymore. You taught me that when someone's building a lie, you just have to show everyone the real blueprint." The other day, Lily and I were in the backyard of our same cozy house, the one Eric thought wasn't proper enough. We were planting a new rose bush, our hands covered in soil. The sun was warm on our backs. She looked at me, her face smudged with dirt, and she smiled, this brilliant, unburdened smile. "This is the best day ever, Mom." And it was. It really was. There was no grand mansion, no designer clothes, no talk of venture capital. There was just the sun, the earth, and the unwavering love between a mother and her daughter, a peace that we had fought for and won. As I hugged her, smelling the sunshine in her hair, I finally allowed myself a quiet internal laugh. Not a laugh of malice, but of serene, profound satisfaction. Eric Williams had tried to build his fantasy on our backs, but he forgot the first rule of any good architect. Before you build anything, you have to have a solid foundation. And ours was made of truth and hard work and a love that doesn't need to boast. His was made of lies, arrogance, and the pathetic illusion of a hospital wing that had long since turned to dust. And in the end, only one structure was left standing.